streamed on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, Facebook. Hello, YouTube.
Hello, social media.
Hello, social media. We're actually looking for some of our guests right now.
I see Susan here. I'll admit her, and then we'll get started in about a minute.
Hello, Susan. I was going to come to Arizona and track you down. How are you? Why don't you unmute yourself there?
I will. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. How are you in Arizona?
Great. Wonderful. Hey, Robin. Good to see you, Robin.
See you, honey.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Ellie. Thanks
Hello. Good to see you.
Great seeing you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Susan, we cannot thank you enough for putting this program together.
Oh, my goodness. You know what? All the things goes to our veterans and goes to our families. I am just so thrilled that you're willing to give so much attention to our Korean War, Gold Star families and veterans. They certainly deserve it.
Yes. And especially Korean War. I mean, we've done some Gold Star family programs in the past, but we're a little embarrassed at how little that we've covered the Korean War in our programming. I mean, we've done some coverage, but not nearly as much as we should be. Well,
I will help you make up for lost time. No problem.
That's right. Yeah, I'm sure you will.
Don't get sick of me, though.
Feel free to harass and
I think you might regret that.
And definitely feel free because so we are about ready to go, right, Ellie?
I think so. I'll play the theme music and start letting people in.
I don't see Mike Logan, but hopefully he's on his way. Hello and welcome everybody to our VBC Happy Hour on this Monday, September 13th. I'm Todd DiPastino. I'm the director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. And even though it's not breakfast time here where I am in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we're still having a program because in 2008, we started doing in-person events where veterans would come with members of the public. They were always in the morning. They were actually always on a Tuesday morning. And so we called it the Veterans Breakfast Club. But since then, we've expanded the time and locations where we've had our events. And last year, we started doing these veteran storytelling programs online. And it's been wonderful because we've been able to do special events like the one we're doing tonight for National POW MIA Recognition Day, which for some reason is always the third Friday of September. Susan, do you know why that is? Or is it seems arbitrary to me.
That's just how it was said. I know that President Jimmy Carter is the one who had instituted the National POW MIA Recognition Day.
Right.
Why that particular day of September, I'm not sure.
And I'm going to defer the entire program actually to our guest host moderator, Susan Kee, who is the one person I think I really know who has managed to combine the two roles of historian of the Korean War and veterans advocate, especially advocating for veterans and Gold Star families from the Korean War. And she does it in really masterful, expertly crafted interviews that are available on her YouTube channel and on her Facebook page. And she has very generously offered she's been on before, but she very, very generously offered to come tonight for POW MIA Recognition Day, which is this week, and invited two Gold Star family members she knows from the Korean War. Robin Piacine. How do you pronounce it, Robin? How do you pronounce your last name?
Well, we found out that it should be pronounced Piacine.
Piacine. Mark Spiridigliosi will take Mark, how do we pronounce Robin's last name? Please tell us.
I'd say Piacine. That's what I'd say.
Piacine.
Piacine, but
Piacine.
I'm not a native of Italy. My dad just cursed at me in Italian.
How do you pronounce my name? I don't think I've ever gotten it right.
Di Pastino.
All right.
I mean, that's easy enough.
Yeah.
It's those little pieces of macaroni that's cooked in pastine.
That's right. And then we also have Mike Logan, who's another Gold Star family member whose father turns out was a POW, went missing in action, and then later declared deceased. And I think we're still waiting on Mike to come. But before we get to Susan and Robin and Mike, I do want to make a few announcements about some upcoming events. We have coming up here. Well, today we had the release of the Scuttlebutt, right, Sean?
That's right.
And the Scuttlebutt is our podcast. That's also a video cast. We have it every week. Sean is the host. I have nothing to do with it, or very little. When it goes really, really well, I'll take some credit for it. But I really have nothing to do with it.
And it's always going really, really well. So
it is always going well. And you have an apropos subject that was released today.
Yeah, it just so happens that we sort of aligned this week with this program and the Scuttlebutt. We had two representatives from the DPAA on the program talk about how the government goes about finding POW MIAs. I really appreciated their website, dpaa.mil. As I started to sort of dive in and research them, I realized how extensive their record keeping is, how they go about identifying remains. Everything is on their site. Everything from their mission to stories about those who have been recovered. And you'd find it very amazing how often people are recovered. They have a full list on there chronicling every person that is identified. And we get into a little bit of how that identification takes place in the podcast. Certainly with the technology for DNA taking a large leap in the last couple decades, it's definitely helped them, obviously. But I hope everyone goes and checks it out. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts if you want to listen to it, or if you just want to pop on YouTube and watch it. It's on there. Ellie does a fantastic job of editing these together. And you'll learn something. So join us on the Scuttlebutt this week.
And when we did our trip last year in 2020 to Vietnam, we met with the U.S. DPAA in Hanoi, and it was absolutely a highlight of the trip. I think how they go about searching for remains, following up on leads, and how important their mission is. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. So. You could go onto our YouTube channel, watch the Scuttlebutt. You could download it anywhere where you listen to podcasts. You go to our website, right, Sean,
Yep.
to get the link to it?
Yeah, and make sure that you like, share, subscribe, or ring the bell. These are all sort of like social media terms, but if you give us a review, that always helps us and helps build our audience. So always looking to do that with the podcast.
Thank you, Sean. I do want to say, too, that Sean was instrumental in securing our guest for next week, a week from tonight. We're having two World War II veterans joining us, Luciano Graziano, who's 98 years old, who landed on Omaha Beach in the third wave on D-Day, and was there as the last surviving person who was there for the surrender in Reims, the Little Red Schoolhouse in Reims. And we also, Sean was just able to get Jake Larson, TikTok star, TikTok sensation, Jake Larson, who is
98 years old, and he's a firecracker.
Oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
His granddaughter, Michaela, runs a TikTok account of just Jake sharing stories largely from World War II, but also from growing up in the Depression in Minnesota. And Jake remembers everything, and he's totally fascinating. I encourage you to listen to or watch any of his interviews. He went viral last year with the animation of his wife's photograph and his reaction to that. But so Jake is joining us with Lewis, and that'll be next Monday at 7 p.m. And then the following night, Tuesday, we have a very big week coming up next week. Tuesday night, Glenn Flickinger will host Greatest Generation Live. We're going to be discussing this book with this author, Stephen Kee, who wrote a much discussed book called Marshall and His Generals. We are asking people, if you are a World War II history buff and you have favorite generals from World War II, let us know who they are. And we'll compare them with how Marshall ranked them, because Marshall ranked 37 of his generals, of his combat commanders, according to such things as wisdom and age and energy and charisma and things like that. So it'll be interesting to talk to Professor Tafe about that. And then we have 2 in-person events next week. One in Beaver County on Wednesday morning and one in Penn Hills in Pittsburgh. And Sean, we are going to stream, Sean and Ellie, we're going to live stream both of these events.
That's correct. So if you are unable to make it, pop over on Zoom starting around 8 o'clock, 8:15. We will be on. I'll be walking around the room saying hi to people, and we will live stream the program in its entirety.
Very good. Yeah. So hope you'll join us. We will put out, we'll remind you that these events are coming up. Connor Ritchie from Lafayette, Louisiana. I see your hand is up. How are you, Connor?
I'm doing well, and I'm excited that my friend Jake is going to be doing a Zoom meeting. Jake is a good person, good friend of mine.
And boy, we have to thank you for connecting us with Jake. You're the one who gave us Jake's phone number.
Yes, I am the one that gave Jake's number, and he was interviewed by some other veterans organization. That's inspired me to meet him. I mean, imagine what he's seen and what he's been through all of his life, pretty much.
Yeah.
And he's sharp as a tack. I mean, he could tell you every single detail, every single importance of World War II. No matter what job he did, he'll tell you. So
we tried to reach him through social media and it didn't work. And so without your phone number, we wouldn't have been able to reach him. Mr. Masters, haven't you had Jake in your classroom remotely?
Yeah, we did an interview with him. I guess it would have been the early part of August or so. So my summertime group of students were involved in that one.
Your summertime students, that's right. And this is Scott Masters. He teaches at a wonderful private school in Toronto. Henry Shepke, were you on that? Were you on that one this summer? I know that you've been sitting in on Mr. Masters' classes, Henry Shepke.
Unfortunately, I wasn't, because I was in Door County at that time, but I did go to the one of Eisenhower, Mr. Eisenhower.
Yes, who has spelled differently than the Dwight D. Eisenhower we know of. But Henry, do you have Jake's autograph?
Yeah, I have. He has like a postcard, and I have 2 of his postcards signed.
Okay. Great. And you put in the chat here, Papa Jake is the best TikTok star. I agree. Hands down, the best TikTok star. All right. I'm going to, unless we have any other announcements, do we have anybody else who wants to make an announcement for the good of the order or for the general edification of the group? John Worley. Oh, hey, Jack Morrow. Let's go with you. Jack Morrow, World War II Marine. How are you, Jack?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
What I'm wondering about, what has happened to my good friend Warren Goss? I haven't seen him on camera for quite some time.
Yeah, we need to get Warren. We need to get Warren involved. He came to our breakfast, in-person breakfast, on August 21st. I think he's doing okay. But you're right. I should send a reminder to him. Last I know, August 21st, he's doing okay.
I'm glad to hear that, because he hasn't been to senior men's meeting, which just started last Friday for the first time after a year and a half.
Here you go, Jack. Here's what you should do. Call him and harass him, because he does respond to your phone calls. He told me that. He said, like, and he responds to them, I think, because you're a World War II Marine, and so you warrant a response. You don't respond to me, but give him a call. All right.
I'll give him a shot.
Okay.
Thank you.
Henry Shepke, you have your hand up.
I was just gonna say that he's good, because I heard from him recently when I wrote him a letter, so he's doing well.
Oh, good. Very good. Very good. Thanks for that update there, Henry. Let's see. Any other? I want to announce we have a trip coming up. If you're in the Western Pennsylvania area or Northern Virginia, say, or Maryland, we are going to the new the new National Museum of the United States Army at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and also the National Museum of the Marine Corps on September 30th and October 1st. It's an overnight trip. We still have slots. We have about 25 people signed up. It is a go. We are going to go. And if you're interested in joining us, let me know. You can email me, Todd, TODD, at veteransbreakfastclub.org. If if you're in the Northern Virginia area and just want to meet with us, maybe have dinner with us, please feel free to do that. I think Mary Klepper will be doing that. And I know at least one other person will be joining us there from Northern Virginia. All right. Let's go to Susan Kee. Susan, thank you for Oh, John Worley, did you want to say something?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to say something about MIAs. I had an incident when I was in Vietnam. It was a psychological devastation to my unit that I was with, because one of my men we don't know whether he was captured or went AWOL in the middle of a combat situation. But he was gone I was trying to research and find my notes, and I'm just about to find them, but I can't exactly, but I don't know whether it was either 8 or 28 days that he was gone and absent. And now we're out in the boonies in combat. And then after this period of time, I think it was whatever period of time it was, all of a sudden, one day, here he comes walking back into camp out of nowhere. They immediately rushed him off, called in a helicopter that come in, picked him up and rushed him off. And we never heard from him again or anything about him. But the psychological impact that had on the company from the time that he disappeared, because he became an MIA immediately within us and within our company. And then we couldn't find his body. So we're all wondering, where is he? And then all of a sudden he shows up. Well, anyway, I'm just throwing that out because it just does something to your mind. You think, what was he? Was he an enemy? Was he embedded, entrenched enemy himself? I don't know. I still don't know to this day, but I'm trying to find my notes because I've got some clinical notes that I'm researching. I'll try to find them for you, but.
Oh, please do. That sounds like a fascinating story.
It is.
Could go into so many different directions.
Oh, we could.
Human beings are relational and they're social, and we know so little about the universe, the world that we live in. But what we do know are the people that we trust and depend on. And when we don't know their whereabouts or what happened to them, it's distressing.
It throws you off kilter.
Yeah.
It
throws
does.
you off kilter, which is exactly why. And I think, anyone who's not a veteran and I don't come from a military family, I think it was always hard for me to totally understand the MIA issue. I understand it now. I do understand it now. That that lack of closure is agonizing. Wouldn't you say, Susan?
Yes, I've met several hundred families of Korean War families of Korean War missing in action. And I meet them in Washington, D.C. at the annual meeting that DPAA holds specifically for families of missing from the Korean War. They also have a separate meeting for Vietnam as well every year. And so every time I meet these families, I see heartbreak and pain, and they're still living in that war. They haven't been able to leave that war behind. We often think about veterans with PTSD. I think families of missing still have trauma from that past war. And so they're among the most forgotten, I believe, of the Korean forgotten war are the families. Nobody thinks about the families that are still waiting for these loved ones from 70 years ago. They're still living in that war every day. And I'm sure Robin and Mike can speak much more personally about it, since that's what they have lived through all of their life. But I just, even as a person attending these meetings, can observe that very clearly, that they carry that pain and burden.
And let me reintroduce you in a sense that Susan was born in South Korea, grew up in the United States, and it dawned on her several years ago that you owe your life, in essence, to those who served in the Korean War, and you've dedicated your life to honoring and celebrating them, and also honoring the Gold Star families, especially from that war. And you've brought here with us tonight 2 members of Gold Star families of soldiers who went missing. Essentially, their disposition is not known. In 1950, Robin is one, and Mike Logan, who is going to be joining us very shortly, if he hasn't already, is another. And I'm just going to turn the program over to you, Susan, if you want to introduce them and their stories.
Sure. I want to first introduce Robin, and I don't know if Mike is on yet, but I would, I don't know if you want me to start with the presentation I had for the POW MIAs.
Yeah, why don't you? Can you share your screen?
Right. I want to say something that's most important, though, before I start my presentation, and that is what is in my heart to these families. I know there will be many other MIA families that will be watching this, as I'll be sharing this program with many MIA families I know beyond the 2 families we are honoring here today. So I just want to say to the families who are watching, who are still waiting for your loved ones, that I am mindful every day of the reason why I am alive and free, and that's because your loved one died and gave his life to save the Korean people. There's no other reason I am here today. And so it is a very direct sacrifice for the benefit I have today of living and being free. So I just want to recognize the tremendous sacrifice of the hero in your family and the hole in your heart that you have lived with your entire life because you gave up a loved one to save us. So to me, we can never make up for that loss, and we can never fill that loss. But I commit to you, as someone who is an advocate for Korean War veterans and Gold Star families, that I will do everything I can to make these heroes known, that their sacrifice is made known and acknowledged, that it is not in vain. You know, I hope to live a life worthy of the sacrifices these heroes made. And so I resolve to do everything I can to tell their stories and to honor the families. So I just want to extend my heartfelt condolences to the families for all the pain that the Korean War has brought to you. And my most heartfelt and deepest gratitude for the life you have given to millions of Koreans who can live free because your loved ones died. So I hope that you take some comfort in knowing that your loved one left a legacy of freedom for us. So that is what I wanted to say first, and it is the most important thing I will say today. So with that, I want to thank Robin for joining us today. Robin Piacine is the niece of William Charles Bradley. He served with the 2nd Infantry Division, and he was a medic during the Korean War. So we will have her share her story after I do a quick overview of the POW MIA topic as it relates to the Korean War. So I will now share my screen, and hopefully it will be successful. Let's see here. Okay. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Great. So really, my reason for doing this presentation is that I want to make sure that these heroes and their families never be forgotten. You know, that is the logo of the POW MIA flag. You are not forgotten. It is our responsibility as Americans and as Koreans who were saved by these heroes to make sure they are not forgotten about. So I wanted to start with that message. Before I get into the specifics of can you see this full screen, or is this okay? Is this disturbing to see all the pages on the left, or is this okay?
We're fine. That's
Okay.
great.
All right, so I wanted to show the progression of the war so that you kind of understand where the missing may be, right? Physically, where are they in Korea? So if you look at that first far left diagram of Korea, when the North Korean communists invaded, they very quickly, within 2 months, made their way all the way down to the Pusan perimeter, which you see in the small green, square on the bottom right of Korea. All of South Korea was taken by the Reds, the communists. And so, the Americans were holding the line there at Pusan perimeter, trying to break out and push back. And so, as you see in the next diagram of the map, September 15 is a very important day because that is when the Incheon landing took place. And that cut off the rear of the North Korean supply lines and their route. And so therefore, with the Incheon landing and with the Pusan, with the Incheon landing, the success of that, the Pusan perimeter, the US Army was able to break out and push north. And so you can see very quickly here, between August and October, where the Americans ended up. Look at all that green space. That's all UN and US forces right there, having made all the way up to almost to the Chinese border by Yalu River. So the war shifted very quickly. So you can imagine that as the battles raged, both in North and South Korea, there were losses everywhere, all over the peninsula, not just in South Korea, but absolutely in North Korea. And as you know, in December 1950, which is the third diagram, that is when the Chinese communists came in full force, hitting at places like Battle of Unsan, Kunuri, where Robin's uncle was fighting, and Chosun Reservoir on the East Coast. So with the brunt of the hundreds of thousands of Chinese that hit our US and UN forces, then they were driven back, and you could see that Seoul was lost again. So Seoul was lost the first time when they invaded, and then it was lost again in January timeframe. So then from there, the US forces and the UN forces pushed back, regained Seoul in March, and then the fighting became fixed along the 38th parallel for the next 2 years. So the last 2 years of the war was pretty much a stalemate. So really the biggest changes happened between June 25th and January 51, which is only 7 months. And in that time, there were such horrific battles happening all over. So really the MIAs are all over Korea, but the biggest concentration right now, 5,300 of our MIAs, of the 7,000, some 700, 5,300 are still in North Korea. So I will go through some of the specifics of that, but I wanted to kind of give you a illustration by map of how quickly things changed and where our heroes were lost in these battles. It is all over Korea, but mostly in North Korea when the Chinese hit very hard. I want to talk about POW camps a little bit. POW camps were not what you would think of like barracks or like, places with, high fences with cement buildings. What the North Koreans did is they hijacked civilian houses. These are just regular houses that people lived in North Korea. And they just push people out. That's what communists do. They just push people out. And they took over a whole area of houses that they put their prisoners in, our prisoners, US and UN. But they situated them right at the border of China and North Korea. So I will show you the map of where all the POW camps were. So you see all these yellow circles and yellow squares that show where the POW camps were. That's right on the border of Yalu River, which is North Korea and China. If you had escaped or tried to escape, it would be very difficult to make your way down from that very northern border of North Korea down to South Korea to the friendly area. So it was virtually impossible as an American or a foreigner not to be discovered if you tried to escape from the POW camps. You would for sure be captured and then taken back. And that did happen to some from what I have read. So it was just really no hope for the prisoners of war once they were taken to these camps, that there was any way to escape or get to friendly side. So this is kind of a illustration of where all the camps were. And these were just houses that they had gathered, and they had guards. Really, the way that they kept our prisoners of war, incarcerated, is by starving them. They had so little food. They had no medical care. And so therefore, they didn't have the strength or the ability to fight or to escape. They were so weak. Most of the prisoners of war were just dying for most of their captivity because they had so little food. So it was a starvation camp is really what it was. So the next thing I want to talk about is the Armistice Agreement. The Armistice Agreement was starting to be negotiated in 1951. That's only a year into the war. It took 2 years to negotiate this armistice. They couldn't get to an agreement because a large part of the reason why they couldn't agree was because of the issue of POWs. The communists wanted all of theirs back, no matter what. Forcefully take all of their army, their soldiers back from U.S. hands that we had captured. They wanted to force repatriation, whereas U.S. and the United Nations insisted that we let that captured prisoner of war choose where they would like to go. So if we had Chinese and North Korean communist soldiers that we had captured, the U.S. wanted to give them a choice to stay in South Korea or go someplace free and not go back to their communist country. So this was a big point of contention that kind of dragged out the armistice for 2 years. But one of the reasons why the armistice was finally signed was because Stalin died finally. And so China lost a lot of the, support that Russia was giving to this Korean War. And so they signed an armistice, which is not a peace treaty. It's just a military agreement that we will have a ceasefire. So technically we are still at war. But so what was agreed upon was that you let the prisoners decide where they want to go. So of course, so many chose to stay in free South Korea. So of the exchanges that happened, this is Freedom Village. It's a picture of Freedom Village. And there was a POW exchange 2 times after or around the armistice signing. The first one was Operation Little Switch from April to May 52. So this was 2 months before. They knew that the agreement would be signed. And this was the exchange of the most sickest and most wounded prisoners that needed to be just released. So that was in April to May. And then in August to December, after the armistice was signed, Operation Big Switch happened. So 75,823 communist prisoners and 12,000 of UN prisoners were exchanged. 22,000 of the 22,000 communist soldiers refused to go back. They were the smart ones. So that's just my editorial there. So anyways, so those guys wanted freedom, and they were probably the ones that felt like they were forced to fight for a communist country they didn't believe in. They didn't have a choice. So that's probably what that scenario was. So this is the Freedom Village. I'll tell you a quick story here of a veteran I know who was a POW. Mr. Arden Rowley served with the 2nd Infantry. He actually was captured in the same battle that Robin's uncle was at Kunuri. And he was in the prison camp for almost 3 years, from December 1950 until August 53. He said when he crossed the Freedom Bridge and came into Freedom Village and he saw the American flag, he took the flag in his hands and he just kissed it. He said there are no words to describe how grateful he was to see the American flag and what that flag symbolized to him, freedom. He had been a prisoner in the scariest place on earth for 3 years. So, I've known Mr. Rowley for a couple of years. He passed away in 2019, but he had the biggest American flagpole in his front yard, I tell you. You could see it for miles. And you know what? I absolutely understand why he loved the American flag. And he had a whole house full of American flags and Uncle Sam. I did not meet anyone who loved America more than him, because he had lost his freedom for nearly 3 years. So he understands what the North Korean people are living under. So our American prisoners of war, of the Korean War, are a very small group of veterans who understand what North Korea really is like. They were there. So then the next thing I want to show you is just another picture here of them being exchanged. And now I want to go into the MIA. So I think, Todd, you had talked about the DPAA. DPAA is a Department of Defense agency at the Pentagon, and DPAA stands for Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. So they are the ones responsible for recovery and identification of all missing service members from all wars, going back to World War II. And I thought I would share these statistics here of how many are missing from each war. So this is as of today. I got it from the DPAA website. World War II, we have a staggering number of missing from World War II, 72,348. That is incredible. It is just, and what I found is Navy had a very high number of losses and that are missing still from World War II because of all the Navy vessels that were torpedoed or sunk during World War II. So Navy actually has a very high number of missing from World War II. Korean War is 5,776 still missing. Now, right after the war, it was 8,000. 8,000. Wait a minute. Is this right? I got this wrong. I'm sorry. It's 7,756. I got these numbers wrong. And I was in a hurry to type this. 7,756 is what's missing. And so that means we only found 500 since the war. I so apologize for this. It's 7,500.
It makes me so happy to see you make a mistake, Susan, because I didn't think you did. So that's good. I was thinking, I appreciate
that's
that.
Not right. We didn't find 3,000. No, we were missing 8,000 when the war happened. So we only found 500. Vietnam, we have 1,500 missing. Libya, there's 1 American missing from 1986. Desert Storm, 2 Americans. In Iraqi Freedom, 3 DoD contractors. Not sure if they're Americans or what nationality they are, but that's what I found on the DoD website. So it's really heart-wrenching, I think, for World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, since those are the largest numbers of still missing. And they're the ones that still carry that pain and just a void in their lives. So during the Korean War, okay, here I got the number right. 8,000 became missing. There are 7,556 now still missing. So I broke it down by branches. So U.S. Army is missing 5,729. Air Force is 908. U.S. Marine Corps is 641 Marines, and the Navy is 26 sailors. Now I say sailors there, but I don't know if you call Navy fighter pilots sailors or not. But there's a lot of Navy fighter pilots that are missing. So, and of course, Navy corpsmen that were tied to the Marines. So there aren't too many actual sailors that were on vessels that are missing. It's mostly fighter pilots and Navy corpsmen. So I should probably word that better. So out of these numbers of 7,556, 5,300 are in North Korea. So you can imagine the despair the families feel because North Korea is so closed off. They are so hostile to the rest of the world. They're so unpredictable. So it's very hard to have hope that there would be any negotiations, any type of humanitarian gesture to release our Americans. There is no such thing as humanitarian gesture from North Korea. All they do is bully the rest of the world. So it makes it so much harder. Whereas, in Vietnam, they're doing diggings there and recovery missions. And so the Vietnam War missing families, they have some hope that their loved ones could be found. But North Korea, they're so closed off, it is very difficult for these families. So I absolutely feel the pain, the added burden they feel because their loved ones are in North Korea. So this is a map illustrating where they are in North Korea and where they are missing. So you see on the left there of the map, POW campsites. So roughly 1,200 Americans are missing in POW campsites all over North Korea, where they were starved to death or not given medical treatment, and they were probably buried in shallow graves somewhere around the POW camp. Then there's a battle, the Unsan Chongcheon area. And that is the area where Robin's uncle was believed to have been killed. And he was, of course, taken to a POW camp. But he was fighting in the Unsan, Kunuri area. So big battles happened there. About 1,500 are missing there. Then you look over to the right on the eastern coast of Korea, and that's the Chosun Reservoir, the epic battle there that took place in the freezing mountains with the 7th Infantry of U.S. Army and 1st Division. And they were encircled by the Chinese there as well, just like Kunuri, where Robin's uncle was. So when the Chinese came with full force, huge losses happened in Chosun Reservoir area and Unsan Cheongcheon area. And then the UN cemeteries that you see there, Kodori, Hungnam, Wonsan, Pyongyang, those are all the places where the Americans buried their own as they were leaving. So there are pictures of General Oliver P. Smith standing over graves at Hungnam of Marines that they had buried after the Battle of Chosun that they could not bring out. I don't know how they decided which ones they brought out, which ones they didn't, but there's a picture of him standing grimly over white crosses of freshly, just buried graves of Marines at Hungnam. So over the years, North Korea has dug up some of these cemeteries and sent remains, but we don't know if they've done it fully or if it was just random here and there. So that's kind of the illustration of where these missing may be, and the the roughly 5,300. Now I also wanted to show the air losses in the Korean War. So this is a map from the DPAA. Look at all these places where our aircrafts went down during the Korean War. One thing I think the Air Force did so much of is bomb the heck out of North Korea. And they did that very well, but they also took great losses. So bombers and fighter planes, Navy planes, there were so many lost. I don't even know what this number is, how many aircrafts this represents. But I just want to show you just the staggering number of losses for US Air Force. I don't know if this is only Air Force. It says air losses, but I think it could be Navy fighters too. Now, the other thing that people don't know is that we actually have missing unknowns buried on US soil. I believe most of you have heard of National Cemetery of the Pacific, or Punchbowl Cemetery in Honolulu. Did you know that we had 867 unidentifiable Korean War heroes buried there in 1954? They have been there since 1954 on US soil, 800 heroes. So that represents at least 800 families who are waiting for loved ones to be identified from US soil, right? It's not like they're behind North Korea. It's not like they're in the DMZ area where it's hard to get to. This is US soil. So this has been an issue that a lot of the families of Korean War MIAs have been very upset about. The slowness by which the US government has decided to disinter. So in 2018 is when they decided, okay, we will disinter all of them and start identifying them and send them home. But up until 2018, it was quite a difficult challenge for the families to try to convince the government to disinter them. There was a lot of heated discussions that I actually saw during meetings with families. But thank goodness now they are disinterring these 800 unidentifiable heroes. Back in those days, they didn't have any forensics, they didn't have DNA, none of that. So if somebody didn't have a dog tag or something identifiable, they were put in as unidentifiable and buried there. So out of the 800 that were buried at Punchbowl Cemetery in Hawaii, 432 were from South Korea, from various, cemeteries that they had dug, during battle, and then they dug them up. That doesn't sound right. They disinterred them and brought them to Kokura for processing, and then carried in caskets to Hawaii. And then also 416 were from North Korea, when North Korea returned 416 remains to us, and another additional 19 during the 50s and 60s. So the DPAA is currently working on a 7-year project to disinter all of them, bring them all out of the ground and identify them. So this is very good news for all the families who have been waiting for a long time. So this is in US soil. This is absolutely doable, and this is absolutely should have been done, and it is finally being done. So to date, 432 unknowns have been disinterred and 153 have been identified. So they still have a ways to go, but this is a great progress for the families who are waiting. I visit this cemetery every year when I go to Hawaii. And this is one of the places that breaks my heart the most. Because when you look, it's a massive area. It's 800 graves of US Korean War heroes. They don't have a name. Nobody knows they're there. And so when I look at these graves, I wonder, who are you? Where's your family? And why are you still here? You know? And so my heart breaks for them because I know these are the heroes that died to save my family and the people of Korea. I have a very direct connection to them. They died for me. So I go there to pay respects and I pray for these heroes to be all sent home. I wish for the day that this section will no longer exist. But this is a very unknown thing, literally unknown, right? No pun intended. The graves actually say US unknown Korea, but this is an unknown part of American cemetery there in Punchbowl. So I would really recommend that if any of you go to Honolulu on a visit, please visit this section. When you go in through the front gate, it's the immediate right section. Just turn right. That whole section is US unknown Korea. And these heroes deserve to be visited and prayed for and given respect because nobody visits them. They don't have a name. And so it is really something that continues to break my heart that they're still there. But I'm so grateful that DPAA is finally making good progress on disinterring them. So this is what the graves look like. I wanted to show a recent picture that DPAA posted on Facebook of how they disinter. And so obviously they brought the casket out of the ground and they're putting a flag on it, on the casket, and preparing it to transport to the lab. There's a lab in Honolulu. DPAA is actually at Hickam Air Force Base. And I actually visited that lab, and they have tables where they lay out the remains and do all kinds of forensics, and they have scientists and all kinds of people working to identify and match the DNA of the families to the remains that they find. So this is all in Hawaii. And it is really, really a sad part of the cemetery is the US unknowns Korea. Now they also had USS Oklahoma unknowns in here as well. For those of you who may not have known, all the USS Oklahoma unknowns that they have been identifying, I think they're almost done with that, or if they finished it, but they were all also buried at Punchbowl. So when USS Oklahoma was hit at Pearl Harbor, all the unidentifiable sailors were put here as well as US unknown World War II. So I think Korea is the next big section now they are working on. The other thing I want to show you is the most recent repatriation of Korean War missing, which happened on August 2018. I don't know if many of you watched this on TV, but I certainly did, and I know all the Korean War families did. When President Trump met with Kim in Singapore, after that summit, he was able to negotiate the return of 55 caskets. Now, from DPAA, what I understand is there's probably over 200 sets of American remains in these 55 caskets. So it is definitely more than 55 heroes. And to date, since 2018, they have identified 47 missing Americans. And I had the great honor of attending military honors funeral of one of the heroes, Major Harvey Storms, at Arlington National Cemetery in July. So, and he had been fighting at Chosin Reservoir. So a lot of the ones that they're finding from this set of remains that were returned were from 7th Infantry Division of US Army that were finding on the East Chosin in North Korea. So for those families, it is miraculous. They never thought their loved ones would be returned, especially where they were fighting and because they're in North Korea. You know, it's just hard to hope. But miracles do happen. And I hope that we will see more of this happening with repatriation from North Korea. This is Mike Pence, was at the ceremony. I actually know a family who attended the ceremony, family of Joseph Matsunaga, Japanese American from Hawaii. He's still missing, but his sister lives in Hawaii and she actually attended the ceremony. And she told me all about what it was like to be there. Very emotional for the families. This is a picture I just wanted to share of a trip I took with Gold Star families of Korean War to Korea. So the Korean government hosts a revisit trip for Gold Star families of both MIAs and missing in action and killed in action. And I know all these families and I know all these heroes through them. And I just wanted to represent to you that there are so many families, even beyond Robin and Mike and these families. There's still 7,756 heroes and their families waiting. So I just wanted to show you this because it's so powerful. You know, you see them holding their loved one, and they're still holding their loved ones in their hearts, waiting for them to return. This is the Korean War Museum in Seoul near Yongsan. I know we have some Korea defense veterans that may have served at Yongsan, but there's a museum there now, Korean War Memorial. And on the west and the east wing of this museum are the bronze plaques you see here on the wall. Those are the names of all the Korean War fallen that are named each by name. Over 36,000 Americans and all the 21 United Nations and their fallen are named there. But we don't have a place like that yet in the US, but we will soon. So I will talk a little bit about that. The next picture here is families looking across to North Korea. So I took this picture when I was with the families. And you can only imagine what they're thinking. You know, where's my loved one? What happened to my loved one? Will we ever see our loved one return from that closed off regime of North Korea? And so it's a longing, it's a sadness, and it's some level of despair and also hope. So it's a mix of so many feelings that I know these families feel when they look across. You know, it's like looking across and seeing, you know, if you have a missing child, you know, maybe your child went missing and ran away, not running away, but, you know, you have a child missing or someone missing, and you could kind of see where they may be, and you can't get there. And they won't release your child. You know, it's that kind of despair that these families feel. And so they just feel so much despair and pain. But I thought this was so important to illustrate what the families are longing for, is their loved ones to come home. I mentioned the wall at the Korean War Memorial in Korea that has the 36,000 names of fallen. Well, we in the United States will finally have a place where we will honor all the killed and all the Gold Star families who gave up their loved one in the Korean War. So you see that round pool of remembrance area by the flag there. That used to have a pool of remembrance. That's where they're going to build the wall of remembrance, which will have all the names of our killed and MIAs, including Robin's uncle and Mike's dad, and so many families I know. All of them will finally have a place. And I emphasize this again because this wall is more than just a wall for these families. They don't have a grave. They don't have a gravestone. This is going to be their gravestone. And this may be the only gravestone if they never get their loved ones back. So this wall of remembrance is so important to these families, and it will be so sacred. And so I'm so grateful to the Korean War Veterans Memorial Foundation. They're starting to very soon we'll start etching the names on the stones. I am keeping very close communications with the foundation that's working on this right now, and it will be dedicated July 27th next year. And I will be there with Robin and so many families who want to finally see their loved ones honored by this country. So this is kind of the rendering of what it will look like. This is kind of the wall right there, all around, circular, it's beautiful. And then this will be kind of the close-up. So that is the presentation I had of kind of the overview of POW, MIA. I know that was very quick, but I hope that gave you some good background about where our Korean War MIAs may be and what these are feeling still 7 years later. So that's where I will conclude my presentation. Okay, so with that, Todd, should we go to Robin or should we go to Mike? I don't know if Mike joined.
Mike is with us. Hello, Mike.
I don't see Mike.
I do see Mike.
Okay, as long as you can see Mike.
And I only recognize him because I saw your interview with him on YouTube, which was wonderful.
Wow.
Mike, thank you very much for joining us. Mike, I think we could safely say Mike is the only one on the program here on Zoom who's had an airplane named after him, Little Mike.
Well, actually, I got some correction on that. I kept saying that it was named after him.
It's not named after him. It's just a coincidence.
Well, actually, he was already flying Little Mike, and then he named his son Mike. It was actually the other way.
Okay. Let me reverse what I just said.
Yeah, I didn't get that
call
yeah.
who's named after an airplane.
Yeah. So, anyways, Todd, I'm going to let you kind of facilitate questions here to Robin and Mike. I don't want to make it look like my program, but I can certainly interject if there's parts of their story that I think they should share. But I think you know their story pretty well.
I do know their story, but I'd like let's start with Robin. Let's start with Robin and have her tell us a little bit about her uncle. Do
you have a picture of you can share?
I'm getting there. Okay. Yes. Right. Here we go. This is William Charles Bradley. Sergeant William Charles Bradley, a fine picture. Robin, do you know when this picture was taken?
Well, first of all, I don't know. I never met my uncle. I only have information through my mom and my aunt. I would say that he was probably at home. I mean, that wallpaper is very unique.
Yeah.
And I would say it's probably after he enlisted. So that would be probably about the end of 1948.
Okay, so he had already served in World War II, correct?
That is correct. And he re-enlisted.
And he had already served in Korea, actually.
Yes, he did. Yes, he was there during the latter part of the occupation after the surrender of Japan.
Right, and probably helping to facilitate the repatriation of the Japanese occupiers back to Japan. And he was your mother's brother.
That's correct.
You told Susan a poignant story of being a little girl. You could almost picture it at a dresser, brushing your hair, looking into the mirror. And on the dresser was a portrait of your uncle, Bill. I'm assuming, was this the picture?
Yes, it was.
And you just said, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, I can recall that very well because it still brings tears to my eyes. In fact, I still have that dresser. My mom passed. I needed to have that. And that was one of the reasons because as a young girl, I would sit there at her vanity looking into the mirror and I always saw this picture of my uncle, but nobody ever really talked about him. So I'd be brushing my hair and thinking, oh my goodness, you know what? I kind of look like him. And so, my hair was more of a brown color back then. So I looked at him and I'm thinking, wow, his eyebrows are kind of like mine. The hair color is pretty much the same. Our faces are really similar. Wow, how cool is that? But why is this all I know about him? So I finally approached my mother about him. And the first time I did that was when we had a POW class in high school. And, she just fell apart because I was talking to her about, Uncle Bill. What about Uncle Bill? And she just fell apart. And I found out that she named my second brother after him because when he ended up re-enlisting again, before he left, and they were so close, she said, Bill, I'm going to name my next son after you. And she did that. And, it was amazing because my brother Brad, instead of taking the name William Bradley, we call him Brad. And he feels very proud to be named after my uncle. But, that's kind of the story. I just couldn't believe that there were so many similarities, and I had a lot of questions.
It's like so many families, often the most painful stories are the ones that aren't told. and the children like us go digging for them, and kind of it's a process of discovery. What did you discover about your Uncle Bill's, Korean War service, his capture, and his death?
Well, actually, what I found out was, I'd like to explain how the beginnings of all this, my involvement. And that was, there was an article in the newspaper about anybody who had somebody missing from the Korean War could donate DNA. And that might help in the process. So my mother and her older sister, my Aunt Jane, thought, wow, this would be really great. We might have a chance here. So they did that, and Department of Defense contacted them and invited them to the national update. And so we went to the update, and then they provided us some basic information about my uncle. So later on, my mother could not attend anymore, neither could my aunt. My brother Brad went once or twice, but it was just so emotional. And my mother would end up leaving the room, and she was hysterically crying. And so I ended up being the person to attend the meetings, and I wanted to know more about my uncle, and I wanted to know why he wasn't home yet. So I joined a family organization, the Coalition of Families, and eventually became president of it. But I found out from one of my really good friends from the coalition that he had been in NARA in College Park, Maryland, and he had found a debriefing report, something that the Department of Defense never found, even though they had people going in there. And it stated real clearly that my uncle actually was seen in a POW camp, but kind of like a holding area, and that he had died of pneumonia, and he was named. So first of all, we were told he was killed in action by DPAA. And then, an independent researcher found the debriefing report, and it took till 2008 for them to change the status. And the reason why we were really, pushing this was, if you have somebody missing, you need to know where they're missing, so that when we're able to, if ever, to be able to go back in, we're looking in the right place for somebody. And so that was really important to our family. But what I ended up doing was requesting the entire file on my uncle, not just what they gave me. And so that was extremely helpful, because I got a lot of information. The fact that he was in the hospital at least once while he was over in Korea, and just a lot of information about where he was at, and information about his 9th Infantry Regiment and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the interesting thing was that the very first news article that was published said he was a POW.
Yeah, he was first listed. I found that so interesting. He was first listed as not killed in action, but as a POW.
Yeah, and so when I showed that to DPAA, they said, "Where did you find this?" I said, "Well, my grandmother had kept this, and they had never seen this article before." So, you really have.
I'm sorry, Robin, but I should tell people from Pennsylvania, you'll be interested to know that Bill Bradley was from Carlisle or Mechanicsburg, that area, the central part of the state, not too far from where we are here in Pittsburgh.
Right, and he had worked at Maslin Carpets when it was running in Carlisle, and that's where my grandmother had worked. But when my grandmother found out that he eventually, from the report, was killed in action, she became president of a Gold Star family organization, and she would take people to Washington that were looking for some information regarding their lost loved one. And so she carried that on, and as long as she could.
Right. And then finally, after the war, after the armistice, he was declared dead, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You sent me this, which I find so fascinating, and I want to read up on it further. Could you describe what this document is?
It's called the Shadish List, and it was a record of all those persons who were POW that, from my knowledge, that had died. So that we had a list so that people, the government would know that they were captured and they died. And so on that list, under the 9th Infantry Regiment Medical Company, is the last name of Bradley. And so the government never shared that with me, but the person that helped me with my other information at NARA found this list and pointed that out to me. So what I was going to say is, it's just like when you go to the doctors, you have to be your own best advocate.
Right.
And the Department of Defense isn't going to have all the information in front of them about somebody, because the files were in NARA are actually kind of messed up, because people were only there for a short time and the files weren't put back where they should have been put back. So some of the files they can't even find. But that particular thing, that really helped me really narrow this thing down. Yes, he was a POW because it was stated in the newspaper, and we have a debriefing report, and it's on the Shadish list. And so, he wasn't killed in action. He became a prisoner.
And I should let people know that it's called the Shadish list because it was a list compiled by a man named William Shadish, who was a soldier, a physician who was captured by the North Koreans, was held prisoner for almost 3 years. And he secretly kept, what a job that he did. There's another man, Johnny Johnson, who did the same thing, I believe, right? Who secretly kept a list of the prisoners he ran across and those who died in captivity, so that their loved ones back home would know what had happened to them if Shadish and Johnson ever eventually got home, which they did. And I believe Johnson received a Silver Star for those efforts. And these are the documents. They're like sacred texts almost, that they were smuggled out because they weren't allowed to keep this information. They could have been executed if they were caught with this information, but they were able to keep it with them until they got home and were able to share this with authorities back home. It's a small, quiet act of heroism that very few people know about.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot, the other thing I'd really like to point out too is, and I know that it's really hard for me to understand why, students are not taught about World War II. They're not taught about the Korean War, the Cold War, or the Vietnam War in history classes. It's amazing to me. And I don't understand that, because I'm a secretary for a local Korean War Vet Association, and the guys would go into school, and the students loved hearing from them, but they never knew anything. They were never taught that. And the person that allowed us to come in was a veteran, and he felt it was really important to hear firsthand accounts of what it was like to sacrifice your time and your life to go into war and to battle, and what it was like for them and why it was important.
Right. Yeah, you're preaching to the choir here, Robin. That is something that we bemoan often, especially with Connor Ritchie, who's in high school, and Henry Shepke, who's in middle school. Henry has his hand up. I'm sure he'd agree with you right now. Hey, Henry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I totally agree with that. They don't teach that at all, really. And many of my classmates aren't aware really at all about the veterans and their sacrifices. They're like completely oblivious, and they seem to not really care. And it's kind of sad to me.
You
Yes.
know, I see Mike has been patiently waiting here to share a little bit of his story. And Susan, please do feel free to jump in. I'd love Mike Logan to talk a little bit about his father. And the only thing I'm going to do is insist upon is to start with this remarkable photograph of your father writing a letter, presumably to your mother. And that is a portrait of your mother that he's looking at as he's writing the letter. And here's the portrait of your mother. Oh my gosh, Mike, your parents were like had movie star looks.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I thank you very much for having me. And I apologize that I was a little bit late getting on, but I was glad to sit and listen to Susan because she's been very interesting. And I learned something every time I hear her talk to her. So, but this picture was always special to us because I'm a photographer. I'm a retired photographer, but my dad was a very good photographer. And I have the camera that this was made from, and it's an old Kodak shoots 620 film, but it has a little timer on it where you push down the timer and it would give you 20 or 30 seconds before the shutter would release. And so he used that quite often. I have a picture that he took of a mule deer that he shot. And the camera's laying in the middle of the street, and he's got the mule deer on the back of the car, and he shot it, the picture of himself with the mule deer, you know, self-portrait, a selfie. So he was shooting selfies when he was 27 years old.
He's the first person in history to shoot a selfie. I think
Right.
I think we can say that. Absolutely wonderful photograph, and I do want to share others that with everyone. You have some wonderful photos, fam. And in fact, before Susan talks, I will, or ask you questions, I will share this wonderful family photo also. This is another great one. Boy, those old color photos, you feel like you could just jump right into the picture. I'm assuming this is you, Mike?
Yeah, I'm in my mother's arms, yes.
Oh, you're here. Okay. Boy,
Yeah.
I wish I had that outfit. I'd wear it every day.
Well, I didn't tell Susan earlier, but my mother made those two outfits.
Whoa.
She had learned to be quite a seamstress. Her mother was a good seamstress, and before she got out of high school, she could make a dress and wear it to school the next day.
Do you remember much about your father?
You know, I don't. Unfortunately, Todd, I was just too young. I was not even 2 years old when he was shot down. So this picture was actually taken by my grandmother the week he left for Japan, which was July 1950. And so she came out to Spokane, Washington, and he was called up while she was there. And so, but my grandmother, his mother, actually took this picture and several of the other ones you'll see. But those outfits were made by my mother.
Oh, I love those outfits. Here's another great shot of the two of you. Mike, if we could do a whole program on just his military service, because he was a World War II veteran who had served from early on in the war. I read that he got his pilot's license in high school, joined the Army Air Corps before Pearl Harbor, and was shipped off to England and started flying C-47s in transport. And was he I keep on saying I'm going to let Susan talk, but of course I lie. Was he one of the 39 pilots who flew the first paratroopers on the first U.S. airborne operation on November 7th, 8th, 1942 in North Africa? Was he one of those pilots?
I don't think so. I don't think that he was actually over there in 42. I think he actually joined the arena like in 43 or in late 42.
I thought you said that he received an air medal.
He did. And that was for the big lift of, when they took them all over there unaccompanied by fighter escorts and so forth. So that, yes, and that you're right.
North Africa.
In North Africa, right.
Mike, that was 42. Okay. It had to be.
Yeah.
I'm so curious about this, and I'm sorry to belabor it, but this is a big deal. I mean, this was 1,500 miles from England to North Africa to drop paratroopers in North Africa, the first U.S. airborne operation ever. Didn't go that well, but it was partly because it was an unescorted airlift. It was really bad weather, and they succeeded in dropping these paratroopers, and it was not easy. He absolutely could have been killed very easily on that run alone, let alone the subsequent flights that he took, missions that he was on. But if he was one of those, and I do believe he was, that is quite something. He was part of something historic and important.
Right. Well, he does have the medal. I know that because I have it. So, the actual background behind it, I never really knew that either.
Right. I'll be interested to try and find a little bit more about him. Susan, let me turn the questioning over to you.
Myself here. Okay, there we go.
Yes.
So, Mike, where are you? I don't see Mike anymore.
I'm here.
Okay, you moved. Okay, so I think I'm just going to give a quick summary of what happened to Mike's dad, so people have some context. So when he got to Korea, well, he actually didn't get to Korea. He actually was sent to Japan, and from Japan, these B-29 Super Fortress bombers were sent in to bomb North Korea. This was in July to September that he was doing about, he was shot down on the 19th mission, but he did 18 missions in a span of just about, what is that? Yeah, about maybe 5 or 6 weeks. And so he was flying out of Japan, and so he was shot down on November, I'm sorry, am I getting my dates mixed up? I got too many heroes in my head.
September 9th.
September 9th, that's right, September 9th. So this was before Incheon landing and before Busan perimeter breakout. So things were very precarious during the Korean War, where remember I showed the small map where there was a small perimeter left of South Korea that was free from communists. That's all we had. And so the air power was so important to try to knock out the enemy as much as possible to gain some progress and give our guys the ability to diminish the enemy. So, these bombers and these fighter pilots were constantly going into North Korea to, cut supply lines, bomb bridges, whatever they could to stop the enemy from advancing any further. So he had a very critical role at a very precarious time during the early months of the war. And I'm going to let Mike here talk about that one airman here on the right with the sling. He actually did not end up on the last mission that was shot down. So I'm going to let Mike tell us about what happened here with him. And this was just shortly before the last mission when they were shot down. And if you could take us through what happened when it was shot down, and then what you uncovered about where your dad went after the plane was shut down.
Well, the reason we know a lot about this picture was from a letter that he wrote to my mother. And he had mentioned the fact that they had done 18 missions, and a lot of the missions would have been a lot more, but they were scrubbed due to weather and the planes had problems and so forth. But anyway, he wrote this letter. This picture was taken, and he wrote her about the picture that was taken, and his fellow crew member who had fallen coming down the ladder out of the cockpit and broke his arm, and he would not be making, of course, he named him by name, but he would not be making the next mission that they would fly within the next day or two because of the broken arm. So that's how we know not only the date of this picture, but we know that the gentleman on the top right there didn't actually fly on the last mission. He was substituted by someone else. And but all the members of this crew, my dad is on the back row, the second from the end.
The tallest.
So, yeah, he was 6'2". He played basketball and football in high school. And but anyway, that's how we know about this, the timing of this picture, and was from a letter that he wrote my mother, and I still have that letter.
What happened on that mission? Could you tell us how they were shot down?
Well, they sent the B-29s over there because of their high altitude bombing capabilities and because of their big, huge payloads. Well, but the problem was because of the weather and stuff, they were not able to do high altitude bombing and had to use low altitude bombing because so they could hit the targets. Well, and that opened them up to anti-aircraft fire. So they were on this 19th mission. I think there were 6 planes in the squadron, and they were on their last target. They had already hit their previous targets, and this was the last one before returning. And the plane took a direct hit in the number 2 engine and was on fire. And so they were told to get ready, get their parachutes on, to get ready to abandon ship. And they had turned the airplane toward, I guess it would be the east, but to try to get to the ocean, and so they could ditch the plane when it broke, blew up and basically broke in 2 parts. And there, from the other members of the squadron, they saw 5 parachutes, and then in a later accounting, a 6th parachute was said to be seen, but it was on fire. And so they knew that 5 of the 11 had gotten out, or 6 of them actually had gotten out. And so they circled back around. They couldn't stay on the site too long because of the anti-aircraft fire, but they saw a lot of activity on the ground, vehicles and people. So they knew that there was no chance that they were not going to get captured. They were going to fall, directly into enemy territory. And they could see the 2 pieces of the plane in the wreckage on the ground, and the parachutes had landed close to it. So they knew that 5 of them were captured.
And was he listed originally as missing in action, or as POW, or as killed in action? Was there any initial determination of his whereabouts?
He was initially listed as missing in action, and that's all. Okay. He was shot down, missing in action, and we never knew about the parachutes or any of that. That was all kept from us for a long time.
And from what I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said a lot like what Robin said. What we learned, we had to, my grandmother and my mother had to dig it up. The government was not forthcoming in this information at all. I mean, it was obviously didn't want us to know.
Why do you think?
I have no earthly idea why, but it was all classified, top secret, and we didn't know. We didn't know for a long time. It was not until my grandmother went to Washington in 1956, some 5 years, almost 6 years afterwards, that she was actually told that he was a POW and not killed in action.
Did he have value to the North Koreans or to the Chinese or to the Soviets for being a B-29 pilot?
Oh, absolutely. Mark Sutter has written a book called American Trophies and mentions my dad in the book. Any pilots, whether they were B-29 or especially the helicopter pilots or the jet pilots, they were considered trophies. And, my dad was never seen in any of the POW camps. And so, that they would have made notes of the fact that a captain of a B-29, 30 years old, would have been listed in some of the POW list, or those that were repatriated would have remembered him or his name. And he was never seen. And yet he was known to be alive and captured alive. And so we know for sure that he was sent through China to Russia.
So he was something of a trophy, or, as it were, of a capture. And the first evidence, apparently, that he was alive and captured came in early November, from what I read, during that push that Susan was talking about up the Korean Peninsula, across the 38th parallel, up close to the Yalu River, the China border, when the Americans first occupied Pyongyang. And it was in the courthouse at Pyongyang, in a jail cell, that they found this scrawled on the wall. Captain Sam Logan, Captain USAF, shot down 9 September, 27 September. So obviously he was there in that room, and he left that message so that people would know his whereabouts. They would know that he was alive. And that was discovered. And then shortly after that, the Soviets, the Pravda, the Soviet newspaper, released a photograph of your father at the crash site.
That's correct. They did. It's actually, it was made with 16 millimeter movie by a Russian paparazzi type photographer. These are actual stills, but there's probably 20 or 30 seconds of color movies of his capture. And you can see he's been stripped and he's in his VVDs and he's got a cut on his chin. So I'm not sure, he might have got that when he's trying to get out of the plane. Right. But nevertheless, he was captured alive. And this came out in Pravda, which is, I told Susan, this is really funny. Pravda stands for truth. The meaning of Pravda means truth. And from the communists, that's really funny. But anyway, the Washington Post actually picked up on this, but a British journalist was writing about Mig Alley and found this video, and it came out in the Washington Post, and so that's how we got it.
It's a very strange kind of turn of events that, the Russians would have published a picture of him in 1950, in November 1950. That was obviously a still from the 16 millimeter film. And then that was all kind of forgotten about until 2010, when you said this filmmaker, this documentary filmmaker, discovered the original footage. And these are stills from that footage that also included footage of the crashed plane.
Correct. Actually, there was a couple, and in the actual video, you could still see the plane smoldering.
Still smoldering. Yeah, really something. So do you have you contend, and I think Susan would agree with you from all the research that you've done, that he was whisked across the border to China and then taken to the Soviet Union?
Oh, absolutely. Because the Chinese had no technology as far as big bombers or helicopters, but the Russians were definitely interested in that. And the two of them were in this together. I mean, the actual photographs were taken by a Russian paparazzi, so, or a war journalist. So, they were there, and they claimed in the article that they wrote that we shot this plane down. So we, as in Russians, not we as in the communists, we as Russia.
Right. And, if I can add a few things there, the Russians were very interested, as Mike said, in our aircrafts, the capabilities that they did not have. They wanted to steal our secrets. And the way that they can do that is to get into the mind of the pilots who knew everything about the mechanics of the aircraft, whether it was a jet plane or a bomber or a helicopter. Helicopters, I don't know, didn't go too near the Yalu River there, but so that was really their primary motivator for capturing and taking our U.S. Air Force pilots. When I go to the DPA meetings, I meet a lot of Air Force families, and they all have the same story. They have all found some document in the Russian archives that name their loved one, mentioned as being interrogated by the Russians. So it's not just the case of Mike, but many U.S. Air Force pilots who were taken by the Russians. And, this is something that Russia never acknowledged, obviously, because Russia didn't even show that they were involved in the Korean War, not publicly anyways. Of course, our US government knew that they were the ones that were providing all the machinery for the war, Russian tanks and, weapons and machine guns and everything, is what, we saw, our Korean War veterans saw, is all Russian weapons and machinery. So, the Russians always stayed with their MiGs in what they call Mig Alley near the Yalu River. They never wanted to show that they were directly involved in the war. And so they never really came down to South Korea or anywhere near where they can be discovered as being involved in a real active participant in the war. So when they took these Americans, of course, they would hide that fact as well. And when the repatriation happened, looks like, from what we know of at least Mike's dad's case, we knew there was a scratching on the wall, that there was this photo that the Russians had. So there was some awareness that the US government had, and yet there was no effort to get these heroes back.
So Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Department of Defense declared him dead in 1953 or 1954.
It was about 5 years later. So, yeah.
But the body, of course, was never found. You really don't know when he died or how he died or where his remains were disposed of. And how did your mom, and here's another great wedding picture of your dad and your mom. They got married in 1944 on a 30-day furlough. How did your mom respond? I mean, did she believe that he was still alive? Or?
I think she honestly did and thought, for the first 4 or 5 years, she thought someday there'd be a knock on the door and he'd be standing there.
Oh.
But once he was pronounced dead, she had 2 boys to raise, and basically, I think she had come to the realization that she needed to move on with her life.
Right. And she ended up living a pretty long life. Did she ever remarry?
She did. She remarried when I was 9. And what's funny about that, while my dad was serving in World War II, she worked in a photography studio. And these pictures were made in the studio that she worked in. And she worked with a lady by the name of Jane Swan. And Jane Swan had a younger brother named Randall Swan. Well, she married Randall Swan, and that became my stepfather. Oh, and he knew my dad. Randall Swan actually played basketball for East Nashville High School, but he did not play with my dad because he was 4 years younger.
Right.
But he remembered my dad, and but he had gotten out of the Navy and had bought a house, and his parents were living with him in the house that he bought 4 doors down from the house my mother had bought. And my mother worked with his sister. So it was kind of a match,
Right.
And so he was being transferred with General Electric Company. And so his proposal was, Ginger, would you and the boys want to go with me?
And she said yes. And she went by Ginger. Her name was Virginia. She went by Ginger.
Well, everybody knew her as Ginger. I'm not sure a whole lot of people knew her as Virginia, but when she was younger, her parents called her Virginia, and everybody called her Virginia. But somewhere along the way, it got to be Ginger. And so the rest of her life, until she was 91 years old, she was Ginger.
Here's a picture of your father. Now, your father's mother, your grandmother, sounds
Right.
like she was a tenacious advocate for Gold Star families and for also trying to find out whatever happened to her son.
Right. She only had one child, and that was Sam. And so she, she went to Washington. She and other Gold Stars mothers got together, and they pressed Washington really hard for more information, because she never would accept the fact that, he was dead. And if he was dead, she wanted to know how and when and where.
Right.
And that picture right there was made while he was in Texas, going to the academy there, and she went to see him. And I think that was like 41 or 42, while he was still in school going through to learn to be a pilot.
Yeah, you can see that he's still a cadet right here because he has that insignia on his hat. Oh, how absolutely. You have a wonderful collection. What a compelling story. Susan, would you mind if I open it up a little bit to questions or comments that people might have?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think we should take questions.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
for Robin and Mike.
Sure.
Feel free to ask. Yeah, Bob Mizwa.
Quick question. Any speculation as to why this late stage in history, the Soviets, or now the Russians, aren't willing to release this information?
I honestly think it's...
What's that?
I said, I honestly think it's because we've never pressed them hard enough for it.
Yeah, that would be, I'm sorry, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it would take a researcher going to Moscow, looking through those archives, I guess. You have to know what you're looking for and where you're looking. I'm guessing, I don't know. John DeLallo, how are you?
Todd, I'm fine. Still teaching.
I've got to let people know, John DeLallo, Air Force veteran. We haven't seen him in quite a bit because this is a scary thought. He's helping to teach first grade.
Well, actually, I'm certified to teach all the way from first, all the way up through 12. And I've encountered a little bit of the revisionist history that they're trying to foist on our kids. And I'd like to think that I've got some high school seniors that I'm their hero. So we're absolutely, positively, trying to teach the truth. But more to the point, somebody had asked, I think it might have been Susan, about how long it took to get information out of the federal government. Susan, my father was a spy in World War II. And I can say that freely now because I have the proof at hand. He was an independent radio operator working with the French partisans. I intend on going down to College Park, Maryland, and digging deeper into the file to see about some duty that he may have pulled with the Italian Partigiani in World War II as well. The names of the OSS operatives were never declassified until 2017. And, more to the point, Mike, I think you had made the comment, you have no earthly idea why it took the government, nor do I. It's absurd. It's frustrating. Todd and I have shared a lot of information about my dad, and I do have proof of his service in France. And we're still trying to dig out, from the Italian campaign. Supposedly he was north of the Gustav Line and reporting on German troop movements. And how in hell he ever survived being an independent radio operator is also kind of a mystery, but he did.
And it's absolutely fascinating. I've looked at some of the records that John discovered, and it really is fascinating. One attribute that your dad had that made him a good spy for that area, he spoke a dialect of Italian that only people in that area spoke. And
it's absolutely insane. And Kathy and I, by the way, have been trying to get back to Ireland and Italy both, for the heritage tour for our grandchildren as they graduate high school. And I guess that's getting punched out to 2023 now. We may go in May of 2022 and then again in 23 when the two youngest grandchildren graduate high school. But a trip to Petrella Tifernina, which is up in the Abruzzi range, as well as some other areas north of the Gustav Line, are absolutely in order. And I'm hoping to find somebody, and I'll do a lot of digging before we plan the trip. I'm hoping to find somebody who knows, a Partigiani, or obviously be a grandchild by now, of a partisan in Italy, and we'll see how it shakes out. Dad, left the service. He did not serve in Korea, but my uncle Harry did, and he was a World War II veteran as well. And there's a lot of guys in our VFW who also served in both World War II and Korea. And again, more to Mike Logan's point, Mike, I don't have any earthly idea either why in the world the United States government would withhold records from World War II all the way up till 2017. Perhaps they were just waiting for all of those operatives to be dead or presumed to be, old enough that they couldn't spill any secrets.
Robin,
to that point, I haven't attended a DPAA meeting, but my older brother David has. And at the meeting he attended, and the reason we haven't attended any since is because he was telling them far more than they even knew about Sam Logan Jr. And so about his combat missions, his capture, they knew nothing. So when I've been invited, I said, no, thanks. I don't need that frustration.
Yeah. Robin,
I agree, Mike. I'm going to do my own research at College Park as soon as things open up. This COVID thing's been nuts.
And if you survive the first graders, Robin, I saw your hand up and you put something in the chat here. Could you share that with us?
Yes, I wanted to share that DPAA holds a U.S.-Russian Joint Commission meeting. And usually it's, from what I remember, it's just like once a year. And the whole thing is, oh, we can share our files about your missing to Russia. But when we ask Russia to share information, it's always like, well, we're going to look into that. We'll look into that for you. And I've attended those meetings. I've attended one of those meetings in the past. And it's extremely frustrating that we sit there at the meeting and accept that answer. It really angers me because I have, most of those people are simply pilots or somebody that knows something about airplanes that were held in Russia, like was shared. And, I know I've become friends that are like family that, they've got a dad missing, and it's just, it's so aggravating, and it makes me so angry that they're just doing nothing about it. They're not pushing it enough. I totally agree. I would like so much to see somebody to put a fire under, because the information is there. And we also have like a Chinese thing going on too with the U.S. Russia. I mean, the U.S.-Chinese kind of joint commission, where we let them look at our files, but what do we get?
It's sad that this has become a diplomatic pawn, I think, essentially, rather than a search for the truth and helping family members have some closure about what happened to their loved ones. Henry Shepke, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to share, speaking of like POWs and MIAs, I wanted to share the stories of two veterans that I know. One is Thomas Gwynn. He was a ranger in World War II in the Korean War, I believe with the 30th Division, but I'm not really 100% sure. Anyway, he was wounded 20 times, twice in World War II, I believe, and the rest in the Korean War. And he received 7 Purple Hearts. But he was taken POW in twice during the Korean War, and he actually escaped both times. And he told me about that. He nearly died on the second time though that he tried to escape. He has a really interesting story.
Wow,
And,
Henry, I would love to hear more about that directly from you. It sounds almost impossible. I'd love to learn more about this Mr. Quinn. So he survived the war and he escaped?
Yeah, so I just talked with him briefly for the mail because like I write letters to a bunch of veterans to get autographs and stuff. But I saw a story online and it was pretty crazy. I've never written to someone who has, been wounded.
Give me his first and last name again.
Thomas, so THOMAS, GWYNN.
Okay, I'll look him up. Thank
Thomas
you.
Gwynn. And here's another person you got an autograph from that I would love to have on our program, Hiroshi Miyamura. He Medal of Honor recipient, POW, Korea, member of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team in World War II, and then also called up for Korea. And he's still alive, right, Henry? Yes. 96 years old.
Yeah, he was still alive. And he was also taking POW. And his Medal of Honor was classified because they didn't know exactly if he was alive or not. But if he was, they didn't want it to the Chinese or the North Koreans to like harm him in any way if they knew that of what he did. So it was classified. So he's the only recipient to be awarded the Medal of Honor by one president, but receive it from a different one.
From another one.
Right. Yeah. Actually, that is absolutely true. I did a story on Mr. Miyamura, and he is the only Medal of Honor recipient whose medal was kept classified information while he was in the prison camp. They knew he was in captivity. They didn't want to endanger him anymore. by showing him to be a great hero to us and a great enemy to the North Koreans and the Chinese. He had killed quite a lot of Chinese. So we didn't want to endanger his life. So when he got exchanged in the POW exchange is when he was informed that he got the Medal of Honor. And there's actually a picture of him wearing some fresh clothes actually after he had showered, after he had been released. And he's just kind of stunned when they're telling him he got, awarded the Medal of Honor. So he is absolutely a great hero, Japanese-American hero of the Korean War. And I post that quite a lot because, as you know, there's a lot of animosity between Japan and Korea. But here he is, a Japanese-American hero who risked his own life to save the Korean people. And those things need to be recognized. Of course, he was not from Japan. He was of a Japanese descent. But still, he fought and bled and almost died for the Korean people. And there's some 240 some Japanese Americans who died in the Korean War. There's actually a memorial in Korea with their names. So Japanese Americans are also a very forgotten part of the Korean War. There were so many, and they were very useful because they knew Japanese language. Some of them did. And so they were able to communicate with the Korean people who were forced to learn Japanese during Japanese occupation. So actually, they were quite useful in terms of their ability to communicate with the Koreans. And I know a Japanese-American Korean War veteran in Hawaii, he actually led a platoon or a squad, a squad of Koreans because he was able to speak to them in Japanese. So he fought all the way from Busan Perimeter all the way to Pyongyang, leading ROK soldiers, South Korean Republic of Korea soldiers. So, these are really interesting stories of Japanese-American heroes as well that needs to be recognized. So Henry, you are very lucky because I envy you. I wanted to meet Mr. Miyamura myself.
I envy Henry also. And if we succeed in getting Mr. Miyamura on our program, I will let you know, Susan. I'd love you to be there for it.
I would love to join when you have them on. That would be great.
I've seen that we've gone a little over time here already, and I know Connor usually likes to share a story. Connor, can we bump you? Connor is another student historian who's been interviewing veterans and usually likes to share a story of a World War II vet that he's interviewed lately. Connor, I'd love to have you share it next week if you could, if you'd be available to join us. Would that be okay?
Yes, I'll be with Jake Larson, who is a good friend of mine. And besides, some of these veterans I've interviewed were also Korean War as well.
How great. How fascinating.
And one in particular, Dave Hamilton, his squadron was based in Busan in Korea. So he came to see General Patton's son because he went to school with General Patton's son. So he got to know the Patton family quite well as a kid. He would always tell you that he learned how to swear from General Patton.
General Patton was very good at swearing.
Yeah, he was a general, but knew how to cuss like it's nothing.
and Dave Hamilton himself was the great grandson of Alexander Hamilton. Fascinating person, fascinating lineage. Hey, thanks for sticking with us for this 90 plus minutes. Susan Kee, thank you so much for joining us once again. Robin, thank you for joining us from Tennessee. And Mike, with the Tennessee accent, I assume. Is that the accent that we're hearing, Tennessee accent?
I'm sure it is.
Okay. Mike, thank you for joining us and sharing just a little bit about your father.
Thanks for having me.
Just a fascinating, heartbreaking story. And I'm so grateful that all of us got together this evening for National POW MIA Recognition Day. I hope to see you next week. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.